So, guys, I want to talk about Kyle Fletcher, and I want to say that for me, I really feel like he has a lot of potential as a professional wrestler. And definitely, I'm very, very concerned about, what's going to happen after his Will Ospreay feud. Like, I really think that he's going to get into a bunch of irrelevancy, and he may be one of those wrestlers like Ricky Starks where there's something with him that's really great, but he realizes that the grass is greener in WWE because obviously if AEW is not going to develop him better or have storylines and feuds and other things for him, and he's going to float on the roster or eventually be sent home, why be there? And then one of my biggest evidence of this is that, there's no really like tie-in to, Dynasty, what's his next opponent. He on Dynamite, he's having a random match with Brody King. So what are we going to do? Or is it going to be Buddy Matthews versus Kyle Fletcher at AEW Dynasty? That doesn't seem like a good fit for him after 4 or 5 matches with Will Ospreay. So I've said to myself, for Kyle Fletcher, I think he needs to be the TNT champion for AEW. And I'm going to give you at least like 10 reasons for this. That my number one reason is Daniel Garcia has not been a good champion. That there really has been no feuds or conflicts or anything that he's kind of really done since he's won the title, and at Full Gear. Like, I do think he has a lot of potential. So the big issue with him is that I don't see him going up against a bunch of villains or adversaries. So, like I said before, that he and Shane Taylor should have had a mini feud. And I can appreciate what he did with Jack Perry, but the other issue is the Death Riders, because wasn't like Danny Garcia part of the group of people that are standing against the Death Riders? So why couldn't you have like Pac versus Danny Garcia, Wheeler Yuta versus Daniel Garcia, Claudio versus Daniel Garcia, or even John Moxley versus Daniel Garcia title versus title match? You know, so the fact is that, you've not done anything with him. So you might as well say, hey, we need to reset it. We got to make all the titles matter. So Danny Garcia has not been a good champion, but I also credit him on receiving bad booking. The number two thing is that Kyle Fletcher would be a great champion. I'm actually doing a fantasy booking video, and some ideas are that there would be a feud between him and Danny Garcia. You could actually have them have like, 30-minute match with each other at pay-per-views for a couple of months and actually elevate both stars. And I also think that you can set up a match between Takeshita and Daniel Garcia, or Takeshita and Kyle Fletcher, to be like, hey, you know what? He wants to hold a title as well, another title as well, and see what happens, really. So I think that Kyle Fletcher, he needs an opportunity to shine. I think he can shine. I think he can talk in the microphone. And I think that he's the right person to say, hey, I can make something out of this title. The third thing that I would say about Kyle Fletcher is you have Ring of Honor pay-per-views. And I've said this many, many times that one of the big issues with AEW is that they don't prioritize Ring of Honor. So Kyle Fletcher is a Ring of Honor veteran. And I've said in my fantasy booking, and I'm going to release that maybe in a couple of days, that I would do Kyle Fletcher versus Adam Cole for the TNT Championship at Atlantic City. Because honestly, if you see that match, you're going to be like, hey, you know what? That seems like a good Ring of Honor match. Both these guys are veterans. They've won titles in the company. Adam Cole's a former Ring of Honor heavyweight champion, so it makes sense to actually, have something have something there, really. That would really sell. What if you do Sammy Guevara versus Kyle Fletcher at another show? Or what if you did Dustin Rhodes versus Kyle Fletcher? They both like bloody spots, really. That would be something interesting. That would be a really great match. I think my fifth thing is that it could set up Kyle Fletcher to be a future AEW champion. Like in my fantasy book, and I said that how I would do it is that I would have Kyle Fletcher beat Danny Garcia, and then you have a few opponents, and then what happens is that Double or Nothing, you have Daddy Magic versus Kyle Fletcher, and then you had the Don Callis family beat up Daddy Magic before the match, really. And then what it does is sets up Dan Garcia returning, and what Dan Garcia does is set up a matchup, blood and guts, between him and Kyle Fletcher. And that's when Danny Garcia wins the title back. You put Kyle Fletcher in the contract match at All In, and then at World's End, you have Will Ospreay become the AEW champion, and then you have Kyle Fletcher take it away from him, and then at Revolution, you have Kyle Fletcher versus Will Ospreay, and that's when Ospreay becomes the champion. That's how I would do it. Becomes this champion like 2 times in a row, really. That's how I would do it. But you gotta see what he does with the TNT Championship. If he elevates it, if he has really great matches, that's all good, really. The next reason why I would say this is that the Don Callis family needs to be booked strongly. This has been one of the things that I've been very frustrated about. Like, Don Callis gets a loud reaction. People are saying, fuck Don Callis. He's been consistently getting the longest reactions out of any type of group. He's been on television for a couple of years, and people are booing, saying, fuck Don Callis. If you really want to be honest with you, he's the best long-term faction that they've had, the Don Callis family. They've won 2 titles. They consistently get reactions. You've had Will Ospreay, and look at Will Ospreay. You had him and Takeshita. You had him and Bryan Danielson, and then Ospreay is now a main event player, really. Like, honestly, the Don Callis family is really strong, but the problem with the Don Callis family is that they're the victims of Tony Khan's bad booking. Mark Davis has no direction. He just lost to 2 high flyers. Takeshita had a match with Max Caster. Brian Cage loses way too fucking much, really. Lance Archer and Brian Cage are big, beefy badasses. But, wouldn't you want to do a match between the Murder Machine and the Hurt Syndicate? That sounds like a great match, but more likely you're going to have the Outrunners or Private Party or those 2 guys that wore like the Spike Koopa coats, whatever, really. So they need to start holding titles. They need to be like, hey, you know what? If you don't win the title, that's actually a big deal. They need to kind of utilize them. Don Callis is a great asshole type of wrestler, a manager. So you need to kind of utilize that. It's very, very just bad that they're not being utilized. So definitely giving them another title and a storyline around the title is actually best for business. And then the fourth thing that I would say is that it can actually implode the Don Callis family. And the reason why I say that's a good thing is because the Don Callis family has gone on for a long time. What would happen if people say, hey, you know what, they need to break up, or Tony says, hey, they need to break up? So like I've said, what would happen if you had a match between Takeshita and Kyle Fletcher for the TNT Championship, and Kyle Fletcher clocks Takeshita, or he clocks Mark Davis, or he clocks like another wrestler within the group, and that's that really to win the title, cheats when the referee's not looking, hits him with the title, or he uses extra leverage or whatever, really, so it kind of will give them a bunch of flaws, really. You can say that, hey, maybe Kyle Fletcher is not the champion he dreams of. He has to cheat and whatever, really. So it's kind of, it's a kind of thing where you can add some weaknesses to the Don Callis family, so that would be another thing. It can it could be hey, maybe Don Callis plays favorites. So now he's going to, favor Kyle Fletcher, and then other people are going to feel overlooked and neglected. They're going to be hey, you know what? You put all this time in him, you put all the motivation in him, and we feel a little lacked, really. Or they can be hey, you know what? Kyle Fletcher his head is so far up his ass, really, we don't want to be part of this group anymore. So you can set up those things. The next thing that I would say is that it gives Kyle Fletcher direction. I mean, I think that's kind of obvious from what I'm saying, but you don't take a very talented wrestler like that and you make him flow in the roster and you don't give him, big spots or anything like that. And then the ninth reason that I would say is that it puts him on pay-per-view cards. Like, I do think that maybe at one point Kyle Fletcher should headline an AEW pay-per-view, or he should get a world championship match. And he should be like, main eventing Collision. And like, we really need to see what this Kyle Fletcher experiment can be. What would happen if you do, let's say you take the title off of Jericho at Ring of Honor, Supercard of Honor, and you put it on Bandito, which I don't think is a good choice. But what if you put on Hobbs and do like Hobbs with the ROH championship versus Kyle Fletcher with the TNT championship, and you have a match like that? Really, it kind of is good because it's going to say, hey, what can we do with, wrestlers like Kyle Fletcher that have a lot of potential? We just don't waste him on the roster, really. So we gotta use what we have. We gotta use what we have, really. And if somebody's pay-per-view worthy, we got to ride that momentum, really. We got to make sure Kyle Fletcher's on every pay-per-view and ultimately, just making money, making what he deserves. And then the last thing is it shows AEW can develop talents. And I've said this, that, when you look at AEW, Will Ospreay, MJF, Hangman Adam Page, Swerve Strickland, Dr. Britt Baker, Willow, and there's many other ones, and Darby Allin. There are wrestlers like those who have been in other companies, but they've gotten more, like popularity and more familiarity. The audience has gotten more familiar with them through AEW. And then there's some people like, Darby Allin and MJF, the first major, and Willow, the first major company they worked for was AEW. So AEW does build stars, but like, honestly, when you look at Jade Cargill, Cody Rhodes, who I felt, he wasn't a big deal in WWE until he came back, after being in AEW. And then you also look at Ricky Starks, who a lot of people feel is going to be a megastar in that company. And then Andrade, who has a no direction, or Miro. I think when Miro comes back, he could be a major star in WWE. He could be a major like babyface. Like there are so many wrestlers on the AEW roster that should have been developed in AEW, or wrestlers that this is their first time on a major television show, and they have a lot of potential like Ricky Starks, and then there's no like guidance for them. So I really feel that this will say to everybody that, hey, AEW needs to show that they can develop their stars. And like I've said, that the people that they should develop really are Billy Starks, Harley Cameron, Powerhouse Hobbs, Kyle Fletcher, Anthony Bowens, Max Caster, and the Outrunners. Those are like people. Queen Aminata can be in that group as well, really. But and Megan Vane, they're just like, almost 10 wrestlers that I can name off the top of my head that need to really become something in AEW this year, to really be like, hey, we can be main event people. We can add to our divisions. We can add to, what we see in AEW is a lot of people are lost on the roster. Wrong people are pushed. Like I've said many times, imagine if Ricky Starks was in the Death Rider faction versus Wheeler Yuta. There's just a lot of just better choices that they can do with how they book people. But one big thing is that you look at Kyle Fletcher and say, hey, we're not going to have this guy float around on the roster. This guy's kind of shown that he can be one of like the 3 or 4 main events at Revolution, because there's a lot of people that said, hey, Kyle Fletcher and Ospreay should have main evented. It should have been Tony Storm and Mariah May. It should have been Adam Copeland and John Moxley, or it should have been Ricochet and Swerve. You had like 4 main event caliber matches. So the problem is, or even like Kenny Omega versus Takeshita, you had like 5 potential main events, really. But Kyle Fletcher's been in that argument. Like, he can do great penultimate matches. He should be main eventing Dynamite, Collision, Ring of Honor, pay-per-views and other things like that. But you really have to start looking at your roster and be like, hey, this person has it, this person doesn't have it. We got to do something with these people, really. So I really think that, Kyle Fletcher being the TNT champion, that's the best thing that they can do. And then I think that as 11th reason, you have to make that title matter. It only really mattered when you gave it to Christian Cage and Adam Copeland. Their feud over at was like the best feud that they had, really. So can we work hard on topping that? Can we work hard on topping that? What would happen if Darby Allin comes back and then Kyle Fletcher and Darby Allin are actually feuding over that? I think that'll be a really great match. Powerhouse Hobbs and Kyle Fletcher would be a great match for that. What if, you have Adam Copeland versus Kyle Fletcher? A lot of people would want to see that. That would be a really interesting matchup, So it's like what I said, you get more mileage out of Kyle Fletcher being the TNT champion. He definitely really deserves it. And he can also do one more fucking thing for me, which is he can change that fucking title to the AEW TV championship. Because, what are they going to do now? They're going to change that fucking title to the HBO Max championship. Mercedes Moné, are they going to change her title to the Amazon Prime Championship or the TBS Superstation Championship? No, it should be the AEW TV Championship, and Mercedes Moné should be the AEW Women's TV Championship. And that's what they really should do. I just think that there's just a lot of good that you can do. And then also with Dynasty being 2 weeks from now, you have 3 matches. They usually do a 9-match. They usually have like 9 more matches. They used to do like a 10-match, 11-match, 12-match, 13-match, 14-match card with like the preliminary matches and the buy-in matches and the show matches. So I really, really just feel that with Kyle Fletcher, you get a lot more mileage by making him the AEW, the AEW champion the AEW TNT champion. And so I really hope that's something that they do. And I think that you'll get a lot of good out of that. It's going to help him a lot. And I think that next step is to seeing what he can do with the title reign and putting him on all the shows that you can. And also understanding that because he's been Ring of Honor and has won some titles and done some great stuff there, hey, why don't you elevate those pay-per-views, make those must-see pay-per-views, make those must-go ticketed events by having Kyle Fletcher on the card with reasonable people that will draw money. And also on regular AEW pay-per-views as well, really. This needs to be a year developing the young talent and booking people right, and putting the TNT championship on Kyle Fletcher is booking him right.